How's it going, everybody? It's Riley's Redzone here with another episode of the Redzone Review podcast. It's available both on YouTube if you're watching this video version, or on Spotify, Apple, Google, whatever your favorite podcasting service is. So for today's podcast, we're going to be covering a number of topics, and it's very exciting as last night, when I'm recording this, there was a football game. And I haven't been able to say that. I should say an NFL football game. The USFL happened, but we haven't felt that true NFL feeling since the Super Bowl back in February. So it was very special. Even though it was preseason, I'm going to dive into it later in this podcast. I think it's going to take up at least half of the time. I watched every snap. I wrote down every play. And there were a lot of guys that stood out last night in the game. So before that, for the main podcast agenda, I likely am going to turn the other segment into a main video because I think that it's something worth watching. For the first part of this podcast, we're going to talk about some recent NFL news that has happened in the last 10 days since I last recorded a podcast. And so let's start with some injuries. Unfortunately, bad news in most, it's always mostly a difficult thing for teams to kind of recover from, especially this early in training camp. And there's been some pretty impactful injuries. Starting with, I want to talk about Ryan Jensen. It kind of happened pretty close after the last podcast. That's a big hit for the Bucs. I mean, he's a center, but it truly is something that I think will impact the team. As they have said reportedly that they're going to look internally for that replacement. Okay, I mean, yeah, it saves you salary cap and you don't have to work somebody new in, but I'm going to talk about it in a minute. There's apparently two guys that they're considering, and not both of them, in my opinion, are not that they aren't good players, but they're not set up to succeed in this exact situation, in my opinion. I'm just going to quick throw out there, yeah, there are some free agents available. J.C. Treader. People talking about him to the Vikings all the time, I know for sure, but or a Matt Paradis, for example. But it sounds like they're going to go internally, and I think they will, considering it's been almost probably close to 2 weeks. I think it's been about 9 days since he was hurt. But let's talk about who they would look at internally if they were looked to replace him. And it's interesting. The two names that have been brought up so far are Robert Hainsey and Nick Leverett. And the reason this is interesting is currently, if you go on the Bucs website and you take a look at their roster, the only center listed on their roster is, in fact, Ryan Jensen. They don't have another one listed on their roster. And so the two guys that they're considering, starting with Robert Hainsey, was a third-round pick in last year's draft. And he came out of Notre Dame as listed as a tackle. Then I started seeing him listed at guard a bit also. But looking back at it, I don't know exactly what he played last year for the Bucs. He only had 31 snaps, but I can confirm after some research that I remember it and double-checked that he played exclusively right tackle at Notre Dame. Every single snap he played, which was for a number of years, I think he had at least 3 or 4 years starting, was at right tackle. So you're asking him to kick over from right tackle all the way to center, not just to guard, but all the way to the middle. And also, I was actually listening to another source today talking about even, for example, teams replacing their centers. There's a mental aspect to it. Center, although a lot of people talk about tackle being one of the most difficult positions in football, specifically on the offensive line, I think there's another element of center that some players have and some players don't. And so that mental aspect, you're asking a lot of a guy. I think Robert Hainsey was a decent pick, maybe a bit people thought it was a bit overdraft. I thought that was about accurate. I thought he was going to go early 4th round, if I remember correctly, is where I kind of viewed him at. So it wasn't that big of a reach, in my opinion. I thought it was a solid draft choice. It's just asking him to move all the way from the right to the middle. As I mentioned earlier, he only had 31 snaps last year, so we didn't see much of him. Had a 78.2 PFF pass grade, a 63.3 run. So overall 65.7, which is all right, but a decent pass protection. Didn't allow any sacks in those 31 snaps. So we saw him in limited action last year, but potential as a player. It's just I don't know about that center spot. But this other option is Nick Leverett, who I actually had not really. I had to relook at what Todd Bowles' quote was for who's in the running, and his name was mentioned. I was not super familiar with him He was undrafted in 2020 coming out of Rice. And so he spent the entire year in 2020 on the practice squad. And then he started to get activated last year in 2021. He actually had more snaps, almost double what Robert Hainsey had last season as a third-round pick, which is very interesting. That means they believe in Nick Leverett a little bit, as he has had some more playing time. He had 60 snaps last year. He's listed as a guard. He did have 2 penalties and a sack allowed in those 60 snaps. In 18, not an 80, an 18.1 pass grade according to PFF, a trusty source in my opinion. That's very concerning. I mean, my goodness, 59.1 run block. So he had an overall grade of 41.3, which I'm not trying to talk trash on him at all. But that was like the 11th lowest. Specifically, that pass blocking number really concerns me, and I think he could develop. But so at the moment, I would have to lean that Robert Hainsey is probably going to be their starting center, at least on a few other depth chart websites. He's also listed now at this point going to be the starter. I think that's where they're going to go with it, even though that does not give me any confidence at all. I liked Robert Hainsey as a player. I think he will be a solid player as like kind of a rotational player, but at center, not exactly where he's super comfortable playing. It's an interesting choice. I will say he's probably, if I remember correctly, like probably their best or second best reserve lineman. So yeah, it makes sense to get him in there, especially. Another reason I think this is such a big hit is I was concerned when Alex Kappa signed with the Bengals. That was one of the first free agency moves. You thought, oh goodness, here goes a bit of that core. And then they were able to get Jensen back, which I was actually pretty surprised that they were able to do that. But then just for him to go down, it's unfortunate. So we hope he gets better. But that's the situation for the Bucs. A little concerning. The Cowboys also have had some recent news, specifically not super noteworthy, but Michael Gallup said he won't be ready for Week 1, realistically. So for fantasy purposes, you might want to avoid that a bit. But then this even stirred the pot a little bit more when we found out that James Washington is out 6 to 10 weeks. James Washington actually started, I saw some highlights out there, like on Twitter, he started to actually look pretty good as a potential option for Dak as that third player. I think that he really would have been solid in the role right away, and especially with Gallup missing some time right away, but kind of just a go up and get it type receiver. I think he's really good with that, but instead, he's going to be out, and if Gallup's going to be out, it's going to be the CeeDee Lamb show. But watch out for Jalen Tolbert. To me, will be the first option. He is a speedster out of South Alabama this year. Absolute burners. And so he might be a deep threat right away. I liked him. I would have liked him kind of to take over a role from James Washington by the end of the year as that third receiver, as he can just be kind of a one-trick pony deep threat type of player. Kind of like, like a Deshaun Jackson type. I think that could have been a perfect role. He might just have to step up a little bit more, though, and so I believe in that. He's definitely got a shot to perform well, so he's definitely worth looking at here. Just some other names that, since if Gallup's not going to play, they might need to bring in, a guy that normally would be their fifth or sixth receiver, might need to be their third to start the week. Some other names to throw out there: Noah Brown. He's been around for a while, but I specifically want to look at Simi Fehoko. Just had a clip go viral yesterday of him, beating Trayvon Diggs. It's, by the way, just on that, don't overreact too much with the training camp clips. I think about this. If you see a positive, it's great. If you see Simi Fehoko, doing something on a Pro Bowl corner, that's awesome. But we don't have to take too much negative weight. People were kind of getting on Kyle Hamilton last week by getting burned by like a USFL receiver, but it's training camp. Don't overreact too much on the negative. Obviously, you want things to go right all the time. But even listening to some great sources talking about when you're at training camp and you see a guy burn somebody, yeah, it's hard to think like, oh, that's great, and then that's bad for somebody else. That's the way you instantly think about it. Your top receiver beats your top corner, and you think, wow, look at this guy. He's going to be, a blazing receiving threat out there. You forget that, it's not a great rep from your corner, but at the end of the day, both players are going to try to improve their skills before the season, so I don't overreact to too much of that. But Simi Fehoko is looking good at camp. So I imagine that they'll trot out on the field probably CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Tolbert, and they'll probably mix in Simi Fehoko, but they might go with Noah Brown just because he's the more sure thing. And then the other major injury I would say is Tim Patrick. Very unfortunate. Torn ACL. They also had Demaria Crockett tear an ACL that same day for the Broncos. That's very unfortunate. What I will say is this does open the door for KJ Hamler to step in as that third receiver after he dealt with an injury. I just watched a video today where it was like Sutton had an ACL 2 years ago, and then KJ Hamler had a torn ACL last year, and then now Tim Patrick. It's so unfortunate because I think Tim Patrick would have been a really, really good receiver for Russell Wilson, and he should be, in the upcoming years. But I think that him being like a big body threat, I think that could have been really cool with Russell, but it just isn't going to happen right away. So it is what it is. It's unfortunate. But KJ Hamler will have an opportunity out there to potentially, get some playing time with Russell there. Deshaun Watson was officially suspended 6 games this week. We've been waiting for a long, long time on this situation to potentially be cleared up, and it's still not cleared up as it's been appealed. He was initially suspended 6 games from a judge, but now it is looking as though the situation was appealed, and it's likely going to be that they're going to look to suspend him more games. And that's what they want. I think I forgot to see what the NFLPA put out a statement from their perspective, but I believe the league basically, it's what is the word I'm blanking on? It's like just kind of challenged it. They kind of want to overturn this. It's an interesting situation, because it's just very interesting. The league takes it into their own hands. This whole situation is crazy, and it's just such a weird subject too, because if any of the allegations are true, which when you have that many, unfortunately you have to think there's some truth to what is going through his life. It's unfortunate. I think what the biggest deal is what people are talking about, specifically with the Calvin Ridley situation. Yeah, this is kind of crazy if you think about Calvin Ridley getting suspended at least a whole year for betting. I think it was $1,300 on his own team, which I know that's against the rules, but Deshaun Watson having allegations with that many women and only getting 6 to start is very interesting. I'll tell you that. It's going to be a controversial situation for a long time. And I still think it's likely a lot, even I think there's a lot of Browns fans that won't be able to root for him for even when he comes back. It's an interesting situation. I don't know what's going to happen. And it's very unfortunate. I mean, what's gone on for all sides. It's just nobody kind of comes out in the positive from all that situation. So that's the news. But basically, from a football perspective, don't touch Deshaun Watson in fantasy football at all, or anything like that. Really, he's likely, the bare minimum he's getting a 6, and that now we know that we know for a fact. We knew it was coming likely, but now it's official. Okay, he's suspended, likely going to be longer. So just keep that in mind. So just avoid him in fantasy football. I don't know if he's going to play for the Browns this year, but we'll see. And then we had three receivers sign extensions. We talked about the Kyler extension last time. We had 3 players get deals. The Deebo Samuel situation finally cleared itself out. He finally got his money that he deserved. 3 years, almost $72 million. He is currently going to be the 8th highest paid receiver annually if you go by the annual salary. So good for him. He's been holding out. He gets that deal. He's such a playmaker from all sides of the field. I know you can talk about how he mixes in at running back and everything, but he's a top tier playmaker, and that's what it is. He's a utility guy that can do so many things for you. It doesn't matter what you list him at. He's a solid player, and I think it was worth it for him to get what he deserves. And we also see DK Metcalf, who's been a baller for the Seahawks, get paid. He will be the 7th highest paid, so right above Deebo. He got 3 years, $72 million. And actually, it's so crazy because I think DK is like a borderline top 10 receiver. And specifically, like when I'm doing fantasy rankings, I have him lower right now because quarterback's going to be like Geno Smith or Drew Lock. But truly, I think he's a great, great playmaker. Absolutely deserved the money that he's getting here. So congrats to DK. And then perhaps the most unexpected one was Deontay Johnson, who comes in at 2 years, 36.7 mil. I think there were a lot of talks of people thinking he wasn't going to get this deal done at all. And it does get done. And, it's interesting to see only a 2 year. But for him to get that, I mean, it's really interesting because they have Chase Claypool right behind him. And then George Pickens, one of my favorite picks of the draft, looking good in camp too. They have a lot of guys behind him, but nice like for him to get paid. I mean, he's a solid receiver. He's currently going to be the 17th highest paid. That's accurate. I think he's easily a top 20 guy. So I think that's great value. That's perfect for him. So I think it's worth paying him that. If you can get him at that price point, that's totally fine. Totally good. So I think that a lot of receivers there kind of get checked off the list of getting that extension. So that's good for all of them to get their money. So that's kind of the brief overview of what's been going on in the NFL this week. But now it's time for the main segment, which is going to be in today's video. So we're going to talk about the Hall of Fame game. There was football last night. I mean, let's just focus on that again. Football is back. It was enjoyable. Even after the weather delay and everything, we had live football on the TV. And we saw some players, go out there, fight for their jobs. And, it was a blowout. The Raiders ended up winning 27-11. But I think it was a great opportunity to see some players get back in the groove of things. And, I think I'm going to talk about here each side, who stood out. Is there any trends that perhaps showed themselves in this game? Obviously, I'd say the Raiders had a more impressive performance, but the Jags had some solid plays too. So I'm going to talk about almost every position, who showed up, any trends that you can consider, specifically on the offensive side. I watched every play, wrote it down what happened, so I kind of went after the game was done, went through my notes, kind of just watched who kept showing up for good plays and everything. So let's talk about the Raiders offense first. So Raiders obviously able to put up 27 points. They were consistent. They were going down the field. Daniel Carlson hit all the kicks real well. But specifically, Jarrett Stidham proved himself to be the QB2. He's going to be the backup at this, for Las Vegas. There was maybe some debate going in. I believe that Stidham was going to be the number 2, but there was maybe on paper a competition with him and Nick Mullins. But after what we saw last night, in my opinion, there's not much that can change that. He knows the Patriots system super well, and he was out there even showing some wheels, on that scramble touchdown. I mean, yeah, his stat line wasn't crazy. I mean, he was 8 for 15 for 96. He had a 76 PFF grade. But I truly think he just ran the offense pretty well. So for a backup, he was out there making it happen. It was funny. The first play, I was like, whoa, what just happened? That was a duck throw, but it worked. He kind of got hit, with the Trayvon Walker, unnecessary roughness call, which was interesting. But Stidham is the QB2. So if you were to look at a takeaway, that's a clear one. Unfortunately, then, I really don't think Mullins makes the team. It was interesting. They stuck him in the second quarter, and then they took him back out for Stidham. I truly, at this point, unfortunately for Mullins, I don't think he's going to make this team. I think he's probably, if you were to rank all the quarterbacks in the league, he's probably starting somewhere in the 60th range. I think he could maybe be better than the backup for a few teams, but likely he's a third for most teams, and he might be here. But Chase Garbers right behind him had more playing time, and I thought he played pretty well. I like that undrafted signing, and yeah, he's probably not going to make the team, but I think he made a really, really strong case to make the practice squad. He kept throwing to Jordan Vesey, his Cal teammate, and but it worked. He kind of just kept playing ball out there, and that's what he kind of did in college too at Cal. I mean, he just is a gamer, and I think honestly he had a more impressive performance than Mullins. I really just basically don't think Mullins makes the team at all. Maybe he'll get a shot elsewhere, but Garbers I think made a really solid case for the practice squad, which is very interesting. But for the quarterback position, Stidham's the 2. He's going to be the backup. That's pretty much what you get out of it. Now, their running back position went crazy. I can't believe how much happened. I mean, I could talk about the running back position. It sounds like that one interview with the dog, just talking about the running backs. That is literally, that interview is what last night was for the Raiders. Almost every back that got in the game did something substantial. I mean, looking at the roster, almost everybody at least got in there. I didn't see much of Bertain Brown, like a 7th round pick. He might have been hurt, perhaps, but basically, it was shocking coming out of the game here, starting. Josh Jacobs is out there. I mean, they're not playing much of their other starters, and reasonably so, but Josh Jacobs is out there. Now, there's 2 things to look at it this way, because I was hearing what people were saying about it today, too. Here's the thing with it. He played really well. I mean, he first run out the gate, breaks through. He forced 3 missed tackles. I was very surprised to see him get, like, I think at least 2 drives. I think it was 3 drives worth of Josh Jacobs. I was pretty surprised by that. But he played well when he was in there. He looked like a man amongst boys, but he also probably should have. I mean, when you're a starting player against who you're going against. But he looked really, really good. But I can see how people could be concerned by the fact that he was in that long in the Hall of Fame game. I honestly don't look into it that much as what most people perhaps are that he was playing. I more so, if I'm the coach, a new coach, and you have this many guys that we're going to talk about at the running back position, honestly, I think it's worth getting guys out there and seeing how your offense works. Specifically, when we saw how deadly these screen passes, they ran slip screen like 10 times, and it worked like 8 of them, 9 of them. I think it almost worked every time. They at least got like 6 yards. It works. And so to just see who's going to do that the best, can Josh Jacobs be a receiving back this season? Yeah, it's worth looking at. You know, like, is he going to be touchdown dependent for fantasy football? I kind of want to talk about fantasy at the end of this running back position, because I think there were a lot of interesting things that happened with this. So you start with him, and then kind of at give or take the same time, Zamir White definitely got more playing time, and he played pretty well. 11 rushes for 52 yards, 3 missed tackles. He was pretty solid in the receiving game too. I think he made a great impact as from where he got drafted as a 4th round pick, and just kind of getting in there and doing the best he can. I think he did a solid job. I think he was playing really, really well. They gave him a lot of playing time, and it was working. What I was actually more surprised by and intrigued was Amir Abdullah. You know, kind of spent last year with the Panthers and didn't do as much, but he looked really good, believe it or not. He got the rushing touchdown, but I thought he looked great in the receiving game. I think there's a chance he might start as a 3rd round back right away, believe it or not. I mean, they also have like Brandon Bolden that you have to remember. He didn't even play a snap, and you know he's going to make the roster because he's a New England guy and he can do well on special teams. And so because of that, if you count Josh Jacobs, Amir Abdullah, Zamir White, and Brandon Bolden, I'm going to be completely honest. I think those 4 are safer than Kenyon Drake right now. I could not believe when I saw Kenyon Drake didn't get in there. He was the 4th running back to get out on the field. I was a little concerned by that. And I was honestly going into the night, going through my rankings for fantasy, for example, I thought Kenyon Drake was going to be the clear 2 to start right away. I mean, I thought Amir Abdullah and Brandon Bolden would be maybe special teams receiving backs, and Zamir White would take a season to get in there, but they were giving the other guys to rock, and maybe it's because he's a veteran. They didn't need to give him the ball as much, but I think if they did, they would have just given it to him and let him rest the rest of the game. They didn't play until the 2nd quarter, and then when he was out there, he didn't do like anything. He had 5 carries for 9 yards. This may be bold. I think there's a chance Kenyon Drake gets cut. It's interesting. I was kind of even surprised when he signed with the Raiders last year. I think there's a chance Kenyon Drake could be a surprise cut. I mean, seriously, if he's not going to offer that much, it's just the other guys Jacobs is a great power back, and he looked decent in the receiving games. Amir White, kind of same thing all around guy, got a lot of playing time, young. And Amir Abdullah is a great receiving back. I think could be the third down back, and then Brandon Bolden be kind of the same thing, but maybe a little extra special teams. I honestly don't see a ton of point for Kenyon Drake even being here. I think he could be at a different spot and do much better. So I was shocked. And then Austin Walter gets in the game. That guy was playing out of his mind last night. I thought he gets in the game. He was immediately explosive. And I honestly loved that pickup for them a few weeks ago, and they just took him. He's shown some burst for the Niners and the Jets before. I thought that was a great underrated pickup. I actually felt bad because I was like, oh, there's no shot he makes this team. But he played better than Kenyon Drake last night. Getting a touchdown too. I mean, I think Austin Walter showed out. If he doesn't make the Raiders, I don't think he'll make the Raiders team. Some team needs to pick him up. I mean, that guy, in my opinion, there's a chance he was the biggest standout last night. For pound, who played the best? Austin Walter played a heck of a game last night. I was absolutely impressed. So to recap the running back position for the Raiders, for fantasy purposes, I honestly am not going to overreact too much on Josh Jacobs. Like, I already had him in the kind of that group of guys with, well, I kind of had him in that tier of like J.K. Dobbins is like above him. And then I'd say he's about the same right now as like an Antonio Gibson, who kind of is in the realm of they might have other players that could get the ball, but he's pretty good. I'd say right now Jacobs is in that like Gibson and Elijah Mitchell tier, for example, for fantasy. But Kenyon Drake is like out of there. I'm lowering him in the rankings for sure. I'm not picking him ever. I'm also not willing to necessarily, unless you're in a super deep draft, take another back for this team. Really, I'm saying that in most fantasy drafts, don't pick a Raiders running back besides Josh Jacobs. If you're in Dynasty, for sure, Zamir White, seeing what you did, that's great to maybe see that. Especially considering Josh Jacobs didn't get his fifth-year option. But honestly, a lot of great running backs for Las Vegas, and the odd man out last night was Kenyon Drake. So, I don't think there's a chance he gets cut. I mean, he has no affiliation really with this new regime, so with Josh McDaniels. So I think there's a chance he's out of the equation. And now at the receiver position, there's a battle for that wide receiver 3 spot. You have Devontae Adams and you have Hunter Renfrow. You kind of need to see who else is going to get in there. And so this offseason, they bring in a bunch of guys. They bring in Demarcus Robinson. They bring in Mac Hollins. They bring in Keelan Cole. And they bring in Tyron Johnson. They all did different things last night. They all had unique circumstances that were either impressive or not. It started with Keelan Cole. First play of the game, gets that 31-yard catch off of the duck from Stidham because he got hit. I thought, wow, look at this guy. He just made a great play. Then he had a pretty bad drop. And then I like they ran a reverse play with him, and I thought he did pretty well. I saw somebody today think he didn't do that well. I personally thought he was all right last night. I think Keelan Cole, it probably wasn't as what I was expecting, but he was okay. I think he played all right. I was kind of pleasantly surprised, but he did exactly what he does at his peak with Tyron Johnson. He did exactly what you expect from Tyron Johnson on a good day, which is kind of like I was talking with, earlier in this podcast, Jalen Tolbert, of like a deep threat Deshaun Jackson type, which, remember when the Raiders had Deshaun Jackson last year. He's a speed threat. And you had the one catch on the sideline, which I thought was pretty impressive. The commentators didn't think it was a catch right away, but I initially did, and then it maybe looked like he didn't, but he caught it. But it wasn't as smooth as you'd maybe like to see it. Like, Devontae caught that ball. He's getting the toe tap in immediately, but he caught it. Then he had the one deep play, which I thought was a really good throw, and he dropped it. And that's exactly what you get from Tyron Johnson. You're going to get the speed, the explosive ability, just not the consistency. And that's exactly what he is. A little bit, maybe just doesn't have the fundamentals, but he's going to go out there and play ball. And so it's interesting to see that explosive ability from him. Going into last night, I thought that Mac Hollins would be the lead to be the wide receiver 3. I thought it would be him or Keelan Cole. Or actually, I thought it was going to be him and Demarcus Robinson, and then kind of Keelan Cole and Tyron Johnson afterwards, and that would be like your roster. Um, Mac Hollins, I actually today when I was looking at like who got snaps, I immediately, if you just focus on last night's game, it was Tyron Johnson, Keelan Cole stood out. Then Demarcus Robinson got out there a little bit. He had 2 for 2 on catches, like he got thrown the ball twice. He caught them both. Didn't do anything crazy with it, but he was out there. He was fine. He's definitely still got a case. I really thought Mac Hollins was gonna maybe be the 3 here. I didn't have him like barely anywhere in my notes, and I thought, what happened here? He had a catch for a -1 yard, so they ran like a screen with him. I don't know what was going there. It seemed like he actually didn't even get playing time till I believe the second quarter or something, maybe even later. I was a little surprised by that. I think all of these other guys just leapfrogged him. I still think he makes a team and everything, but I think Tyron Johnson made a really good case to be the 3, but I don't think he offers the consistency. So you might be, bouncing between him and Demarcus Robinson because Demarcus Robinson showed more consistency. But interesting battle for the wide receiver 3 there. The offensive line, so from what I saw, and I'm able to get grades from, Leatherwood and Parham were fine. I had a big concern, though. Also, I want to note Jermaine Illuminor also had a pretty decent night. I thought those guys looked solid. Specifically great to see it from Leatherwood and Parham because you might have to start them. I thought that was great. And then to see Illuminor do really well, I think he makes his team as a really solid swing tackle, or kind of can play a little bit of guard too. One player stood out though, and not in a positive way, and luckily I got to check the depth chart today and remembered, oh yeah, Colton Miller is on the Raiders. He does not need to start. Brandon Parker, oh man, I felt so bad. He was getting destroyed out there last night. He, according to PFF, the team gave up 2 sacks. So I immediately thought, yep, it was, I wrote it down like 2 times in my notes. It was in that, I think it might have been the second quarter stretch or maybe even the first quarter stretch. Travon Walker gets around Brandon Parker, and then Arden Key got around Brandon Parker. Unfortunately, he did not have a good night. Now, they're going to need him on the roster, unless he keeps playing like this, in which he just did not have a good night. From what I saw, I believe those 2 sacks were from the left tackle, Brandon Parker. So lucky for the team, they don't have to have him in their starting lineup, but hopefully he can improve a bit and be a depth piece. I just thought Jermaine Illuminor, if you're going to keep like a swing tackle, definitely performed a lot better than that. Defensively for the Raiders, if we kind of jump to that, I didn't have as many names. I honestly kept more track of the offensive guys, but Malcolm Kuntz played pretty decent. Had 3 pressures on 24 snaps. He played decent out there. Just saw him a little bit. Who stood out to me more in the game was Kendall Vickers on the defensive line, on the defensive tackle position. He had a sack, I thought, and then he got hurt for a little bit. But he looked pretty good. I think he proved why he can be in the rotation. And then looking back afterwards, Vernon Butler, who started his career in Carolina and didn't do that much as a first-round pick out of, I believe it was Louisiana Tech, and as a late first-rounder, he kind of didn't do much. So he signed with Buffalo last year as to be a depth rotational piece. He didn't, get us too much starting opportunities, but he comes over here. He had 2 pressures on 8 snaps, 25% then pressure rate. That's pretty good. So I'd keep an eye out on him to kind of stay in the rotation. Perhaps the most surprising, because I didn't really hear his name being called last night, Chris Jones, who's bounced around on a number of teams. I remember when he was with the Vikings for a little bit, for a few games. Has been with, I think, the Cardinals for sure for a little bit, I remember, and the Lions last year. He had an 86.6 coverage grade. Now, he's kind of out of the loop when it comes to the roster part of it. They kind of already have their spots filled. Off the top of my head, with like Trayvon Mullen, and they traded for Rocky Sin and Nate Hobbs. And then there's a list of like 3 other guys as well that are kind of already ahead of him that I don't think he makes the team, but I think he could make somewhere as like a 5th or 6th corner, perhaps. So it's worth noting. And then I just kind of threw in the name there, Bryce Cosby. Um, Saw him a lot last night, made a few tackles. Same thing, undrafted free agent. Don't think he makes a team, but practice squad candidate for sure. So that's what I kind of saw from the Raiders. Saw an impressive performance overall. I thought they did really, really well. Specifically, the running backs. Great to see that. Now, I can't say that exactly with the Jags. It was very interesting to see. They went with a more conventional approach to the Hall of Fame game and did not play that many players. So then we got to see the Jake Luton show. Yeah. Meh. I'd say it was overall, specifically in the notes I have. Both Jake Luton and Kyle Sloter were meh. And I'm a huge Kyle Sloter fan. I have a signed helmet from him from when he was with the Vikings a few years ago. And a USFL baller too, but both were just okay. Both did not do anything impressive. I personally, I was re-looking at PFF grades and saw CJ Beathard in last year, even his limited snaps, but he had a 90 grade. You're easily keeping him as a backup, versus these guys. I think, and I forgot about last year, Jake Luton, I believe, got cut. I think he went to Seattle, but it might have been somewhere else for a bit, and then he came back out of Oregon State a few years ago. Had 1 or 2 starts, I believe in 2000, that would have been 2020. Him and Kyle Sloter were both meh. I don't think either of them make the team. That's really all to say. They were not exceptionally bad, and they were not great. They just were there, just overall a Sean Mannion level of play. So I didn't see anything there. Their running backs for Jags were also interesting to watch because Snoop Connor got the first carries, and that's worthy of noting. So he's kind of, you then think about the clear 3 behind ETN and Robinson. Maybe if either of them misses any time at all, you could see him in the rotation. He was decent. I didn't think he played phenomenal, but it's worthy seeing him. He got the first opportunity. Then we saw Mekhi Sargent, and I thought he played pretty well. Not unbelievable, but he had an 85 receiving grade, forced 2 missed tackles. He looked pretty shifty out there. I thought Mekhi Sargent played pretty well for a 4th stringer. Nathan Cottrell, though, actually stood out more to me. He had more opportunities in the kick return game. Really, really good in the receiving game, specifically. I know he's pretty quick. I think he's one of the top 10 speed ratings for what it's worth, on Madden. I think I remember seeing that a few weeks ago, but I knew he's pretty fast. He was getting opportunities in the kick return game, which is interesting to see. You like that when a player can play special teams. Had the receiving touchdown, 4 for 35 in the receiving game. Good performance there. I think that he has a great case to potentially make this team as the 4th. I'm really interested to see who makes it between Mekhi Sargent and Nathan Cottrell, because I think both of those guys could be a 4 on some team. There's so many players in the NFL where it's sometimes from the outside looking in, it's why does this team have this player ranked so highly that they're actually going to make the team, but on another team you have 5 guys who I think, for example, there's a few backup quarterbacks specifically over the last 3 years. I haven't understood why, for example, the Bengals go with Brandon Allen or the Titans go with Logan Woodside as their backup. I feel like there's players that are cut that could have opportunities there. But anyways, both guys, Sargent and Cottrell, I thought played good in the second half. From the receiving game, they didn't play any of their top guys really. Luke Farrell was interesting at tight end. He was pretty consistent. Good to see they picked him in the 5th round last year. So he just was out there. Willie Johnson stood out to me. Undrafted free agent. They got a list of guys. They got Kevin Austin Jr. and I think it was Whittingham is the other undrafted guy that they picked up. And by far, Willie Johnson stood out the most. Had 2 catches for 41. I also remember they gave him an 8-yard reverse. That looked pretty good. And he was out there playing punt returner too. he stood out to me as a guy that could maybe make the practice squad for sure. So I liked seeing that. Willie Johnson played really well out there. Now, I want to talk about, I felt so bad when he fumbled. I'm a huge Marvin Hall fan. I think he's been underrated for the last few years. He's bounced around all over for whether he was in Atlanta or Chicago, and I believe he was with the Browns a little bit. Um, he's a speedster. I like his game a lot. And he was getting some opportunities out there. He had a good play. Then he caught the ball and they fumbled it. I felt bad. I hope because I think he's worthy of like a roster spot somewhere, but I don't know if he's gonna make it, but I hope he does. For their offensive line, Coy Cronk, legendary name. He had 29 snaps. He allowed 3 pressures, so he was just kind of fine out there, but he might not make the team, but worthy just noting as a depth piece. Ben Barch had an 85 pass block grade. Real solid. They picked him out of a small school here up in Minnesota last year, and it's interesting. He's not starting right away, but he definitely, I think, could develop into a starting guard. So great to see that you have that great depth there on the offensive line. And then Bo Benshaw, actually, on a few depth chart things, I don't even know what number he was, but he had an 85 pass grade last night. Experienced guy, time with the Lions and Washington. Interesting. Maybe can make a case to be like a 4th guard on this team. Maybe. If not, I think he's certainly playing that he could get a job somewhere. But if I were to say the big standouts for the Jags, I definitely think that their defense specifically looked pretty good. I think that Travon Walker played well. He didn't go crazy and stick out, but he got a sack, and then that unnecessary or the roughing the passer call was not I don't really know if it was a great call. So he played pretty well out there. I mean, I've said it during the live stream of the draft. I was not a huge fan of him going number 1. Not to say that he won't ever reach that potential, but in my opinion, most of the time you want to go with a safer player with a number 1 pick. And then, everyone's talking about what if you let the chains loose? What if you let this guy go? I don't want to take a guy number 1 that you got to rely on everything. And honestly, I didn't see that much from him at Georgia. I thought he was, if anything, more of a run stopper. But I'm telling you, he's got the potential to develop into something. I just didn't see number 1 pick potential from him, but he played pretty well. What stood out more, though, Arden Key. Let's, quite a baller out there. He had 2 sacks on 7 reps. 7 snaps. 2 sacks. Phenomenal. Great play. I forgot when they mentioned it last night. He started with the Raiders. I think he went to Jacksonville for a bit, and then he went to San Francisco and came back. Looking at their depth chart, it's interesting. If you think of their pass rushers, right, you're going to go with Josh Allen and Travon Walker. They're going to be listed as their outside, weak side linebackers. They have Arden Key as a defensive end, and so at first I was thinking, wow, he just proved in any place he could maybe be a starter, but for sure a 3rd down rotational pass rusher. But then you forget about the Jags have got Kayvon Chase on, and then they also have guys like Dwayne Smoot off the bench that potentially will get time. But I certainly think Arden Key makes this roster. He played really, really well. For the linebackers, Chappelle Russell stood out. Had some few pass rushing snaps also, but had 8 tackles out there. Played pretty well for the backup linebackers. I can think of Tyrell Adams, for example, that he's competing with, and a few other guys. I think he certainly made a case to potentially make this team as a depth piece, so I thought he was pretty good. Trey Herndon had a few tackles with them not playing their free agent acquisition, Darius Williams, as that kind of nickel or slot guy. He looked all right. And it's worth noting for the Jaguars, their kicking battle. Elliott Fry made his kick, and Ryan Santoso did not. I believe Ryan Santoso was even a punter, though. That's what I thought it was interesting that he's even still in the kicking deal. But he's out there attempting it. But I personally thought Elliott Fry looked better, so early lead to Elliott Fry for the kicking battle. So thank you very much for watching this part of reviewing the Hall of Fame game. A lot of great players trying to make a team out there. So thank you overall for listening to the podcast. If you listen to the whole section, I'll hopefully keep doing these as best as I can. I think leaving enough time. I think it'll be interesting if I can. I don't know how it's going to work in my schedule. But if I can maybe, I don't know yet. Like, this is off topic kind of. I'm trying to figure out. I really want to just dive more into film. I don't know. I'm going to try my best. I'd love to break down every preseason game, whether it's on a podcast or even live stream, perhaps, some reactions. But I'm even going to look right now because this is just, if you guys are real fans, if you are listening to this podcast, you're dedicated because you're just chilling and I can just have comfortable conversations about whatever's going on. And so here's the deal with NFL preseason. I would love to watch almost every game and be able to really talk about what's happening. The thing is, I don't know if you can realistically watch every game. Second, I don't know if the NFL service, well, now I think about it, they have the broadcast on. I was going to say for sure I don't think all 22 is working yet, but for like NFL Game Pass or NFL Plus, I think it's called now, I got to figure that out because I hope the all 22 works because I really want to do some videos. I mean, I honestly wanted to do some all 22 videos about the NFL this summer, and their service just does not work yet. So hopefully that'll be on the horizon. But basically, I was able to watch this whole game. I might be able to pick, like, for example, next Thursday, I'll probably watch the Giants-Patriots one. Maybe I can break that down. But I don't know if I'll be able to watch every preseason. I would love to, though, because I want to, like, dive into it. Because watching last night, it totally changes when you see players on the field versus seeing a name on the list on who you think is going to make the team and stuff. It's really a huge difference. So specifically for undrafted rookies, like seeing, honestly, like the guy like Willie Johnson, seeing him as like the bottom of the depth chart, and then like I think he made a case to leapfrog two undrafted guys that I thought Kevin Austin was going to be a standout for them, but Willie Johnson right now stood out. So it's really interesting to see that. So a lot of guys are out there doing their best. So thank you very much for listening to this podcast. I greatly appreciate it. And I'll see you, or you'll hear me in a very soon episode. So thank you for listening or watching.